The next episode of Children of Heroes brought us to a lively city of Tunbridge Wells, about 2 hours drive south of London, where we visited Mr Bohumil Tom Dubec, son of Warrant Officer Bohumil Dubec.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. Your father was a Royal Air Force pilot during the Second
Yes, that's right.
War. Could you tell us more about him?
He joined the Czech Air Force in 1936 as a pilot in Pardubice, and he then, when war broke out and when Germany invaded, he escaped through Poland and France, which many Czech airmen did, and he finally ended up in the UK in, I think, late 1940, early 1941, and joined the RAF. I think maybe you have seen the film Twavé modrý svět.
Yeah, of course.
So he tells me that that was very, very accurate as to what happened to them during that time, and was posted to very many different squadrons. And he first flew Spitfires and Hurricanes, and then at the end of the war was flying Liberators, escorting Russian convoys around the north, Norway and up there. So yeah, and then at the end of the war in 1945 he came back to Czechoslovakia. In 1948, when the communists took power, he managed to escape before they closed the borders with my mother with two suitcases.
How did they manage?
Apparently they paid somebody and he guided them through the forests, and they ended up in Germany.
And after the fall of the Iron Curtain,
Yes.
They came back?
My mother never ever reconciled herself to living in the UK. She believed that one day she'd be able to go back home. And my father, I think, had given up that, the communists were going to be there forever. And so in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, they did go back to Czechoslovakia, and my father's relatives lived in Pardubice, which is where he came from. And so they went for a 2-month trip in 1990 back and visited all the relatives and everything else, and had a wonderful time. And they decided that they were going to move back. But unfortunately, at that point, my mother contracted stomach cancer, and so she died very quickly after that, and which was a shame. But at least she had got back home, for the first time in 48 years or whatever it was, to see everybody. So that was some mercy. I got posted to Prague in 1991. So I packed up my father and I found him a flat in Pardubice, and so he then lived out the rest of his life in Pardubice, where he still had 2 relatives.
And if I'm not mistaken, your father and his fellow airmen were later acknowledged by the President Václav Havel, who invited them to Prague Castle.
Yes.
And he returned them to their former ranks.
Yes.
How important was it?
In Czech, it's called restituce, and so it's like restitution in English, where they, as you rightly point out, they were reinstated to their former rank, and that was very, very important to my father. I mean, he was very, very proud to be able to go and do that, and it made a huge difference to him that he was acknowledged. The other thing that was very good, if I can just add one other thing to this, which I thought was fantastic, you never realised that this was the case. He became a sort of minor celebrity in Pardubice. They had a number of newspaper cuttings, which I've got some of. The local reporters would come to him, and also young people. This is what amazed me. He'd often get a knock on the door, and a young person would turn up, and having seen the article in the newspaper, and come and ask him about his career and his life, and he found that very moving. I think that's how he was dressed when he went to the restitution. Pardubice had an air show each year, and they would come and meet there, and they were all dressed like this as well in those meetings. So yes, here's an example. You see, so this was in Pardubice, and this was a fellow Czech pilot, and this is an Englishman who flew a Spitfire over for the meeting in Pardubice for the aviation show, and this is a picture of them together in that. This is when they got married. There's a few of them when they got married, when my mother and father got married. Here again. So that's when they got married. After they got married in Prague, they were being followed by 2 STB agents constantly, and left their apartment the night they were leaving with the dinner table completely dressed as if they were having guests for dinner, right? And so they left everything apart from the 2 suitcases, and then they managed to get away without the STB agents noticing, because they were assuming they were going to have a dinner party. And I've now discovered that I can go back to Prague, and I've already got the names of the people who I need to see all the files the STB had on my parents. You
studied politics,
yes,
but you ended up working in the oil industry.
Yes.
Did you like your job?
Oh dear, that's a tough question to ask me. I'd say I liked about 50% of my job. I was lucky enough to be posted first to Prague for 4.5 years in my job, which I...
It was after the Velvet Revolution?
Yes, and in 91.
How was this experience?
I could not believe how you could tell, even 18 months after the fall of the Berlin Wall, how repressive the previous regime had been in terms of, for example, private enterprise, right? You know, when we first got there, you'd have a shop that didn't have a person's name, because it wasn't owned by a person, it was state-owned, selling, for example, vegetables. And you'd go there and they'd be selling a kilo of tomatoes for like 2p, yeah, for almost nothing. But 90% of them were rotten. And that was because there was no sort of profit incentive between the farmers and the shop. Yeah? So it didn't matter if the goods didn't get there in good condition. And it was only after we'd been there about 2 years, what I call the white van revolution, white van man revolution came. I used to have to drive from Prague to Bratislava. We had an office in Bratislava, and I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get there in time on that motorway. And when I was driving 2 years into this, into being in Prague, I could see white vans everywhere. And of course, they were private people starting a distribution system. Yeah? They were getting it from the warehouses to the shops. And all of a sudden then, you started seeing shops full of goods. So it was quite interesting to see how that transformed during that period. That settee over there, the red settee, we brought back from Prague. We actually bought it from the National Theatre in Prague, and it was renovated, and so it's a piece of memorabilia. And then we were sent to Singapore for 12 years, and that was fantastic. You hardly ever see a policeman, but at the same time there's no crime. So I'll give you an example. You could put your 9-year-old child on the street at 2 o'clock in the morning and get them to take a taxi on their own without you being there, and be 99.9% certain they would arrive safely at the other place. And also, for me personally, my job entailed me covering most of Asia. So I travelled to virtually all the countries you can name. I think the only one I didn't go to was Pakistan. But other than that, I went to nearly every country you can name out there on business. So for me, that was also fascinating. And
you learned Czech from your parents while growing up in the United Kingdom, is that
correct? My parents had a very, very strong Czech accent. And they decided when I was born that they didn't want me to get that accent. So they didn't speak English to me. They only spoke Czech to me. So when I went to my first nursery school, apparently my mother used to tell this story to everybody. I'd come home and crying my eyes out. And my mother would say, why are you crying? And I would say, because all the boys and girls are stupid. They don't understand what I'm saying.
How much do you feel that your Czech heritage influenced your life?
Well, certainly, I mean, you only have to look at this. Certainly from a food perspective, it's influenced it. Influenced it a lot. My parents loved their food, and I've got their love of food. And, you know, so we used to basically eat all the Czech dishes that you can imagine. So, I mean, everything. My favourite, of course, are cherry dumplings, třešňové knedlíky. They're my absolute favourite. So, no, but anyway, from a more sort of, I suppose, cultural perspective, there is something, I don't know, it's difficult to describe, but there's a very emotional pull. Even though, you know, I spent 90% of my life here, and I consider myself to be British, I don't consider myself to be Czech, but you can be sure when the Czechs are playing ice hockey, you can be sure who I'm shouting for.
And you play golf?
And I play golf, yes.
Where did you start playing golf?
I played rugby and cricket for most of my life. Rugby in the winter, cricket in the summer. And I loved playing rugby and cricket. In fact, because of rugby, I've just had a knee replacement. So that's, but obviously when you stop doing that, you have to find something else. So I used to play the occasional game of golf, not very often. But then I was lucky enough to have a membership of a golf club in Singapore. So I played reasonably often then. And then when I came back and retired, I joined the golf club.
We are approaching the end of our interview.
Okay.
Do you have anything else you would like to add?
I would like to express out loud my appreciation to my parents. They had very, very ordinary jobs here in the UK. They never bought their own home, and they did that because they saved every single penny to put me through a private school for a public school education. And I think I wouldn't necessarily have got as far as I did in my own career if they hadn't made those sacrifices to allow me to do that. And so I'm very, very grateful to them. And I think more importantly, and it's a shame my mother didn't live long enough. I mean, I'd already started my career, but you know, if they saw me now, I think they'd be very proud of that they did the right thing.